Welcome, welcome. We are so honored to be here in the historic Hayti Center for this amazing program. We want to thank our sponsors before we go into our program. The Durham Library Foundation, Friends of the Durham Library, Mechanics and Farmers Bank, North Carolina Mutual, Duke University, Durham Technical Community College, Durham Public Schools, North Carolina Central University, and the Hayti Heritage Center. I'd like to acknowledge, if you'd raise your hand, Tammy Baggett, the Library Director. Members of the library family, that's the Library Board of Trustees, Friends of the Library, Durham Library Foundation, and library staff. And I've seen several elected officials. If you're an elected official, would you raise your hand so we can thank you for being here too? Okay. This is the final event in our Durham Reads Together celebration of March Book One by Congressman John Lewis and Andrew Iden. Andrew, would you wave? They were on the program yesterday. This is a month-long celebration about the themes and the issues that are raised in this amazing book. We hope you will buy a copy of the book, give them to your young friends, your old friends, to everyone, and come to many of our programs that are happening this month. You can find out what they are by grabbing a brochure or going to durhamreads.org. I'm only going to tell you about one program. That's the one that's this Tuesday night at the main library. We will be showing the documentary Freedom Summer, Tuesday, October 7th at 7 p.m. at the main library. The question and answer period will be led by Charlie Cobb, a field secretary of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and one of the founders of the Freedom Schools in Mississippi. This program is sponsored by the John Hope Franklin Center, and we hope you all will come to that. Now, I'd like to introduce Frank Stasio. He's the host of The State of Things on North Carolina Public Radio. He's involved in many important organizations in Durham, including the Religious Coalition for a Nonviolent Durham and the Durham Friends Prison Reentry Ministry. He is the current president of the Durham Central Market that will open in January. Welcome, Frank Stasio. We have been so honored and so blessed to have with us this weekend Congressman John Robert Lewis. He is... He's been called the conscience of the Congress. He represents the 5th Congressional District in Georgia. He was the youngest, and I'm told the most radical, of the original speakers at the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He was beaten. He went to jail 45 times and spent his life fighting for human and civil rights. He is the embodiment of the beloved community. His commitment to justice and nonviolence is an inspiration to us all. Welcome with me, Congressman John Lewis. Before we begin our program, I would like to introduce Ethan Vesley Fladd, the organizing director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, for a special presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a deep and sincere privilege to be in this historic and beautiful space. 50 years ago this month, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In his stirring acceptance speech in Norway a few weeks later, Reverend Dr. King said he accepted the award as the representative of a movement and proclaimed, "I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their mind, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, men other-centered can build up. Reverend Dr. William Barber is an extraordinarily other-centered human being. And like Reverend King a half-century ago, Reverend Barber is audacious in building up an inclusive, inspirational, and unrelenting movement. He has set forth a vision of a just and righteous world that embodies Dr. King's commitment to radical love and social transformation. Reverend Barber calls on each one of us to stand in the gap by seeking moral justice and by resisting structural oppression that undermines our collective security and peace. As the Fellowship of Reconciliation embarks on our 100th year of spiritually rooted nonviolence activism and organizing, we remember Dr. King's membership and active participation in FOR throughout the final decade of his life. Honoring his legacy, we are incredibly proud to award our 35th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Award to Reverend William Barber. I do not know whether she's here. I have to ask. So 5 years ago, Durham's own Cynthia Brown was the recipient of our Martin Luther King Award, and she was going to try to make it. Is Cynthia Brown here? I want to acknowledge her if she is. Okay. She was not able to make it. I am now deeply, sincerely privileged to invite another longtime FOR member, Congressman John Lewis, to present the Martin Luther King Jr. Award to Reverend William Barber.
It is my great honor, and I must say, it is my honor. I feel more than lucky, but very blessed to have this opportunity to present to you Reverend Dr. William Barber, the Martin Luther King Jr. Award, for your service, for your leadership, for never giving up, for never giving in, for keeping the faith, and for keeping your eyes on the prize. Thank you.
Let me first thank God for God's gracious privilege to even allow us to be here today. And I want to thank Congressman John Lewis for being a great elder in the movement and for all that he continues to inspire us to do. Let's give him a hand. If you've ever heard him speak on the floor of the Congress, it moves you and motivates you to do more work in the field. To the Fellowship of Reconciliation, I want to thank you for this award that I receive, not on my own behalf, but on behalf of all of the persons who've been so supportive, not just last year, but for the last 7 years in our attempt to build a multiracial fusion coalition in the South, as some of you know as the Forward Together Moral Monday movement. I want to ask, thank you. people, some don't realize we've been at this 8 years. But in the last year, we've seen the Moral Monday part of that movement grow and expand, and we've been at it now over 79 weeks just on Monday. And if you add all of the other pieces of it, we've had 149 events. That's 2 per week since last April, fighting to right this state and to change and to shift the center of political gravity. Would all of the arrestees of Moral Monday that are here stand up? Would anybody that's been at Moral Monday stand up? If you've attended a Moral Monday, give yourselves a hand. This award belongs to all of you. With John Lewis in the house, I want to also thank those 40 young people who's decided that this summer, rather than simply commemorate the anniversary of the Freedom Summer, they would reenact it. And they were in 47 counties throughout this state, knocking on, calling over nearly 20,000 doors and phone calls, saying that we still believe in the promises of our democracy and the great promises of our faith. I also today want to say that I never thought I'd be standing here like this. I was supposed to be born the day that you spoke, Congressman Lewis. My mother went into labor on the 28th of August, 1963. So I was supposed to be born on the same day that Emmett Till was killed in '55 and the same day you and Dr. King spoke. But I've always been a little rambunctious, and the joke in my family is that I said, hold up, let's wait till after this march and see what the word is going to be. And so I was born on August the 30th, 1963. The Bible says in Isaiah 58, cry loud and spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet and show my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinances of God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching God. Wherefore have we fasted, they say, and why don't you see it, God? Wherefore have we afflicted our souls, and you don't take any knowledge of it? Because behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure, and you exact your labor. You fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. But this is not the kind of fast that I will hear on high. And then it says, is this not the fast that I have chosen? Loose the bands of wickedness. Pay people what they deserve. Undo the heavy burdens. Let the oppressed go free. Break every yoke of oppression. Deal your bread to the hungry. Bring the poor and the cast out into your house. When you seeth the naked, cover him. Cover him, and then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. Then you shall call on the Lord, and God will answer. Then, if you draw out your soul to the hungry, if you satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. And the Lord will guide thee continuously, and satisfy thy soul, and draw it, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, a spring garden. And your waters will never fail, and then they shall be of thee, shall build the old waste places, and thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called repairers of the breach. This weekend is Yom Kippur. And the ancient rabbis demanded that this text specifically, of all of the texts that could have been read in the Old Covenant, that Isaiah 57 and 58 would be the text that you would reflect on during the time of repentance during Yom Kippur. A text that says the issue is not so much what God will do, but what we will do because of what we believe in God. It is a text that says we can never simply worship. We can never simply worship going through the motions of religion. But real worship requires a commitment to justice, a commitment to the least of these, a commitment to changing the systemic realities. And my friends, I only accept this award today to get back with my friends tomorrow Monday and go back to work, because there are breaches that still must be repaired. There are gaps that still must be closed. When extremists, governors and legislators and congresspeople and senators are still speaking with interposition and nullification, blocking access to health care, and blocking funding to public education, and blocking minimum wage, and blocking living wage, and blocking immigrant rights, and blocking labor rights, and blocking women's rights, and blocking LGBT rights, there are still breaches that we've got to close. When war is more palatable to some politicians than justice for the least of these, when the president can be supported for war and not supported to make sure our immigrant friends have immigrant rights, there are a lot of breaches. When we sing God Bless America and say God has shed his grace on us, but then we refuse to give grace to those on the margins, there are a lot of breaches that must be repaired. When, as Ella's song said, until the killing of black men and black mothers' sons is as important as the killing of white men and white mothers' sons, there are a lot of breaches that we've got to repair. As long as there are those, as long as there are those who want to take away voting rights and even want to try to figure out ways to hold on to just a little bit of voting rights, but then deny the protections we won in 1965 to states like Alabama and North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee, there are a lot of breaches. As long as United States has this reality of being the richest and the poorest nation both at the same time, in terms of disparity, there are a lot of breaches. As long as too many of people of faith desire personal prosperity but refuse to have a prophetic witness against injustice, we have a lot of breaches to close. A lot of them. Breaches, gaps, holes, economic breaches, social breaches, political breaches, moral breaches that must be prepared. And to do it, my friends, what we have learned and what we believe is we need a moral revival. Left and right arguments alone are not deep enough for the valley we must come up out of. Democrat and Republican is not deep enough in order to come up out of the holes and the breaches that we are in the nation. It's too puny, they're too divisive. For this work, we need a moral revival. We need our moral imagination rekindled. We need our souls stirred so that we can believe again. Brueggemann says it like this. He says the first gift of a moral movement is not implementation, but the restoration of imagination, to give people the kind of hope that allows them to break free of all of the other allegiances we have made and to dream again. And the Forward Together movement is trying to dream again. It's trying to destroy our imagination again. And we are saying, yes, over against extremism, we still believe our politics can be just. Our society can be just. We can be loving. We can be fair. We can be uplifting. We can move to higher ground. We don't have to live low down in our society. We can move to higher ground. And so the moral movement is saying, Lord, plant North Carolina, plant Washington, D.C., plant the South, plant America, plant our feet on higher ground, because we are the children of those that believe, and we still believe. And so, Congressman Lewis, we've decided in the moral movement that this is our benediction of all that we do, the benediction of the Franciscans. May God bless us with discomfort and easy answers and half-truths and superficial relationships so that we may live deep within our heart. May God bless us with anger and injustice and oppression, exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice and freedom and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain and rejection and starvation and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness of faith to believe that we can make a difference in this difficult world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. And so Martin is not here. Ella's not here. John Lewis has certainly fought for us so many times. But let us say together, we're here now. It's our time, and we shall be called the repairers of the breach.
Thank all of you for being here. I am nothing short of honored and blessed to be in this hallowed space that has meant so much to the history of the city. Sitting next to this man who has meant so much to the soul of our nation. I can only say I'm blessed and humbled to be here in the first place. And thank you all for being here. Congressman Lewis, I was going to start you with your history, but I have to start with that talk now and ask you about something Reverend Dr. Barber pointed to, the gap between the richest and the poorest. When Joanne Abel introduced you, she said you may have made the most radical speech at the march. You did. You did. That speech went well beyond the scope of the march as I understood it to get civil rights legislation passed, and you pointed to the need for structural systemic change in order for that to take root and for that legislation to be meaningful. My question is, has that happened? And if not, what do we need to do? What needs to happen in this nation to create the vision and the imagination that Reverend Dr. Barber spoke of?
Well, first of all, I must say that I agree with every word spoken by Reverend Barber. There must be a revolution of values, a revolution of ideas in America. And we cannot just wait for the American government. You cannot just wait for members of Congress to bring about what I like to call that nonviolent revolution. The people must bring it about. Members of faith must get out there and push and pull. We have to find a way to humanize our politics, humanize the business community, humanize our educational institution. And we all as individuals need to become a little more human. Just be human. Look out and care for each other and respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. When I spoke at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, some people didn't like what I had planned to say, and they thought that it was a little too radical. But when you have something that is so vicious and so evil, so wrong, you have to find radical solution. I didn't like segregation. I didn't like racial discrimination. I didn't like seeing people suffering. I didn't like seeing hunger and poverty. And I wanted to do something about it. And that's why I spoke the way I spoke. I've been working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as chair. I have visited most of the 11 states of the old Confederacy from Virginia to Texas. But it was not just in the American South. It's in our large urban centers in the North. And I felt I had to say something. Several years later, I understood from one of the aides to President Lyndon Johnson, who said to me, he said, President Johnson was very moved by your speech, and he tried to make some of it come real through the Wall Poverty Program.
So it had an impact. You earned that speech. You did a lot of work before you became president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and got up on that podium. Can you take us back to the earliest days of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as you were planning for the sit-ins, the preparation it took, the training it took to be ready for the insult that you were bound to endure?
Well, as a student in Nashville, Tennessee, I met with other students from Fisk University, Tennessee State, Meharry Medical College, from Vanderbilt University, Peabody College, and American Baptist. And we came under the influence of the FOR, the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Met Glenn Smiley, met Jim Lawson, who started conducting nonviolent workshops in late '58 and during the school year 1959. And every Tuesday night, long before we even dreamed or thought about sit-ins or protests, every Tuesday night, about 20 students, primarily college students, would meet at a little Methodist church near Fisk University, where we studied the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. We studied what Gandhi attempted to accomplish in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied the great religions of the world. We studied Thoreau and civil disobedience. But when you're talking about sitting in, well, we were being prepared to grow to accept the way of nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. And many of us were ready. We had test sit-ins in the fall and winter of 1959. And when the students started sitting in at Greensboro Lunch Counter, Woolworth, in Greensboro, North Carolina, we received a call, Jim Lawson did, from a young Methodist minister named Douglas Moore, saying, what can the students in Nashville do to support the students in North Carolina? And Jim Lawson, this representative of FOR, said, we're preparing to start sitting in. We'll be ready in a few days. In a few days, we start sitting in.
Did you feel ready personally?
Did I?
Did you feel ready personally?
Yes. Early on, it was in keeping with my faith. Early on, I accepted the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. I was ready. I grew up only 50 miles from Montgomery, so I followed the drama of Montgomery, starting in 1955, when I was 15 years old. I was deeply moved by the action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So when Jim Lawson and Glenn Smiley came along, I was ready to accept, to sit in, yes, to stand in at the theaters, ready to be a witness. And I did everything that I could to be there for every sit-in, for every protest, whether at the lunch counter or standing in at the theaters. We'd be sitting there sometime and someone would come up and spit on us, or put a lighted cigarette out in our hair, or down our backs, pull us off the lunch counter stools. We did what we call the do's and don'ts. It was my responsibility to draw up the do's and don'ts. I've been working as a janitor in the administration building to pay my way through school. And I liberated a ring of paper, 500 sheets. I didn't, steal it. I just liberated it, and got someone to type the do's and don'ts. And it was very simple. And matter of fact, we're having in book 1, March book 1. It was simple, like do sit up straight, don't talk out, don't laugh out, obey your leaders, remember the teaching of Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. And at the end it said, may God bless you. On February 27, 1960, 89 of us were arrested. And every single student had a copy of the do's and don'ts.
I think for people listening to this, though, it might, when you talk about this being a way of life, a way of peace, it can be in some ways, it can sound to the ear like cheap grace, of course, peace. We all want peace. Please explain to us that part of this means loving your enemy, that understanding that the people who have put this institution of segregation and Jim Crow in place are going to be people that you're going to have to, as part of this conversion, learn to love. How did you do that?
Well, when you accept the way of love, the way of peace, the way of nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living, you come to that point when you respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. You have to accept the idea, in keeping with my faith, that there is a spark of the divine in every human being, and you don't have a right to abuse it. Someone may beat you. Someone may beat you, may call you names, throw you in jail, but you're going to still respect the dignity and the worth of that human being. On one occasion, when I was arrested, a year or so later, and I was being booked. This was during the Freedom Rides in Mississippi. And I was sort of smiling. And people saying it was a smirk, but it was not. I just felt free. The first time I was arrested in Nashville and later going to prison in Mississippi, I felt free. I felt like I crossed over. Growing up in rural Alabama, my mother, my father, my grandparents, great-grandparents told me over and over again, don't get in trouble. And I got in trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble. And that trouble freed me. It liberated me. So I lost any concern about being afraid of jail, afraid of being beaten, afraid of dying.
Well, take us now to the Pettus Bridge. The anniversary is coming up next year, March 7th, 1965. You're facing more than arrest when you looked at the full barrage, the armament on the other side of that bridge that was preventing you from completing the march from Selma to Montgomery. What was going through your mind at the time?
Well, on March 7, 1965, after church, about 600 of us lined up in twos to walk in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion across that bridge to dramatize to the state of Alabama, to the nation, and to the world that people wanted to register to vote. A few days early, a young African-American man had been shot and murdered only about 35 miles from Selma. Young man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson. And the whole idea in the beginning was to literally take his body to Montgomery, to the state capital. And some said, no, we all should go. And we organized. And when we left that Sunday morning, I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. And in this backpack, I had 2 books. I wanted to have something to read in jail. I have one apple and one orange. I wanted to have something to eat. One apple and one orange wouldn't last that long. I had toothpaste and toothbrush. I wanted to be able to brush my teeth because I thought I was going to be in jail with my friends, my colleagues, and my neighbors. We get to the edge of the bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Jose Williams from Dr. King's organization said to me, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." And I said, "Jose, can you swim?" He said, "A little." And I said to myself, and I said to him, really, I said, "Well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump. We're going forward." And we continued to walk. And we came to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. The night before, Sheriff Clark, Jim Clark, who was the sheriff of Dallas County in Selma, had requested that all white men over the age of 21 to come downtown to the courthouse and be deputized, to become part of his posse, to stop the march. Sheriff Clark was a real mean man. He wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side, and he carried an electric calf rodder in his hand. He didn't use it on cows. And he wore a button on his left lapel that said "never." So we just continued to walk. No one saying a word. You can only hear the marching feet. People were picking them up and putting them down. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. A man spoke up and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march. Will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse, return to your homes or to your church." And Jose Williams, walking beside me, said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And the major said, "Troopers, advance." And you saw these men putting on their gas masks. And Jose Williams whispered to me and said, "John, they're going to gas us." And we just slowly continued to walk. And then they started running toward us, beating us with bullwhips, nightsticks, tramping us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick, had a concussion at the bridge. My legs went from under me. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. 49 years later, I don't recall, I don't know how I made it across that bridge, back to that little church. But I do recall being in the church, and apparently someone literally carried me back to the church. The church was full, hundreds of people on the outside trying to get in. Someone says something to the audience, and I stood up and said something like, "I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote." And next thing I knew, I was taken to the Good Samaritan Hospital, where a group of nuns took care of us. 17 of us were hurt.
You have sent, I was struck by one of the things you said along the way when the decision to carry that body was being discussed, and someone said, "Well, let's all go together." And I remember Jesus deciding to go to see his friend Lazarus, who had died, and they knew how dangerous it was to go to Jerusalem at that time. And was it Philip who said, "Let us die with him"? It strikes me that that's what I saw in that moment. You have had a chance to talk about now getting people together to celebrate the 50th anniversary that's coming up next year. You talked about talking to President Obama and Eric Holder just very recently, and I'd like you to kind of reprise those conversations for us and what that march that you took and that fractured skull that you endured means to them in their office today.
Well, I've heard President Obama say on several occasions, and also Lieutenant General Holder have said it, but the President reminded me of it from time to time. The day of the inaugural in '09, he wrote on a little piece of paper, few minutes after he had delivered his inaugural address, he wrote, "Because of you, John." And he was said to me in recent days, if it hadn't been for the march from Selma to Montgomery, the Attorney General said we wouldn't be in office. I think the march from Selma to Montgomery freed and liberated hundreds and thousands of American, Black, white, Latino, Asian American, Native American. And our country is a better country, and we are a better people.
You're right. All of that is true. You are now serving in Congress as well and have been since the mid-'80s. There is a feeling abroad that we are now beyond the question of race, that all the problems have been solved. Remember? Yeah. I was hoping to get a laugh. And I think Reverend Dr. Barber's hard work and effort is a testament to the fact that there's a lot more to be done. But my question to you is it because there's more to be done, or are we sliding backward? Where are we today?
But there are forces in America that want to take us back. But with individuals like Reverend Barber, organizations here in North Carolina, organizations like the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and a more enlightened people, more young people, people of faith, we're not going back. We're not going back. I don't buy the philosophy that we're not post-racial. In spite of all of the progress, in spite of all of the changes, we're not there yet. We have not yet created the beloved community. The scars and stains of racism is still deeply embedded in American society. When someone on the floor of the House of Representatives during a joint session of the Congress, a member of Congress can say to the President of the United States, "You lie." We're not there. We still have a lot of work to do. And it's left up to each one of us to do our part. For the struggle to redeem the soul of America, the struggle to create the beloved community, it's not a struggle that lasts for one day, or one campaign, or one lifetime. We all have to continue to play a role and play our part and play it so well that no one else can do it any better.
I want to ask you about the part of the political process, the part that plays in that. We know that enormous infusions of cash in 2010 and again in 2012 at this state changed the texture and timbre of our legislature, and as a result, legislation was passed that we now have the most restrictive voting legislation in the entire country, largely as a result of those elections and largely as a result of the cash that was spent. This leads us to the political process. You're part of that now. You're in the belly of the beast. Can we work from within the political process, given how much it depends on money and how much money depends on the status quo being maintained? Can we really rely on a political process for change?
We must work inside and we must work outside. Sometime since I've been in the Congress, been an elected official, I feel like I'm reliving my life over. I feel like fighting some of the same battles over again. I would say there's too much money in American politics. It's just too much. Many of our elections have become like auctions. It's going to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
That's not right. It's not fair. It's not just. And the average Joe, the average person, should be able to get out there with ideas and get people to buy in to those ideas, to those positions, and be elected. But we shouldn't sell election like we're selling soap.
Yeah.
Auction off cows and hogs, a bill of kind. We can do better.
Well, I guess that brings us to this book. If we want to reach other audiences and find other means, tell us about how this book came about, the graphic novel, which in many ways tells the story of your life, so brilliantly written in your autobiography, Walking with the Wind. Now we have a graphic representation. Book 1 is out. Tell us a little bit about this and how you thought that this was a good idea and the evolution of the idea.
Well, when I was growing up, I saw what we called then in my family funny books, comic books, and but much later, as a young person after college, after I heard about Rosa Parks, heard about Martin Luther King Jr., met Rosa Parks when I was 17, met Dr. King when I was 18. But as a student, I read a little comic book called Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery Story, published by the Fellowship of Reconciliation, FOR. And that book changed me, motivated me. And then I knew that the students in Greensboro, North Carolina, the 4 students, had also read this book and been inspired and moved by it. So during the end of my 2008 campaign, my communication person for that campaign, who is the co-author of this book and now on my staff, came to me and said, Congressman, you should write a comic book. And I said, no. I sort of said, I guess I had what I call an executive session with myself and said no. And this young man, Andrew Iden, wouldn't give up. He came back again and said, Congressman, you really should write a comic book. And I finally said, yes, if you would write it with me. And so he had this idea. At the end of the campaign, he had the idea that he was going to go to a comic book conference. And they were asking the different volunteers what they're going to do. He said, I'm going to, and people started laughing at him. And I said, don't laugh. It was another comic book. So he convinced me. And this is the result of several years of work. March, book 1, then there will be book 2, then book 3, and I'm not so sure we're going to end at book 3. There could be a book 4. But it's trying to find a way to help educate, inform, and inspire another generation to commit their lives and their time to the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence, to bring about social and political change. To make our world, not just America, not just this little piece of real estate, but to make our world a world at peace with itself.
When you started to see this book come together and you saw the illustrations, I mean, it's a far different thing to write a text without pictures than it is to sort of create these images that are going to capture one particular moment or one particular expression in a story that is as dramatic as yours. Well, how did you feel about some of
Oh, I felt good.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, there was the do's and don'ts in there. I'm so proud that they, to see images of people that was beaten with, went to jail with, to see some of the young people that gave it everything they had. It just made me feel good. And just maybe other young people will see these images and say if they had nothing but raw courage to do what they did, maybe we too can do something. I tell young people all the time, we didn't have a website. We hadn't heard of the internet. We didn't have a fax machine. We had that old mimeograph machine that you had to turn and turn. And using social media and using March as a guide, the way we use Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery story.
Well, you had the experience, and it's amazing to think about it. So those of us of a certain age, you obviously experienced it firsthand. For those of us who didn't, we could see it on television and were watching the kind of the documentation as it happens. It was fresh, it was new, it was exciting. Now, if you're studying this in school at all, and sadly, 47 states in the United States don't teach civil rights adequately, so we have to work on that. But if you see it at all, it's in the framework of history, of documentation. And so I think one of the great things is just seeing these images does bring it to life for a younger audience who didn't experience it or didn't even experience it through the media. This is like social media. This looks like it's happening right now.
Nate Powell, the illustrator, is a gifted artist. He made the word through the illustration jump off the pages. When you feel like you can just touch what is happening, that you can really feel it.
Did any memories come back to you, or did you relive this in ways or have insights just as a result of seeing this that you had either forgotten or new insights that you didn't remember?
Well, I have a pretty good memory. Yeah, pretty good. And certain things that happened, I remember when I was 4 years old. I remember when we moved from the plantation. I remember going down to the public library in the little town of Troy in 1956 when I was 16, with brothers and sisters, cousins, trying to get library cards. And the librarian saying to us, the library is not for colors, only for whites. But to go back there for a book signing, it's I remember, well, I have a friend, Julia Bond, who would tell people from time to time, he said, don't argue with John Lewis about dates and time and places. He said he can look up in the sky and there's a plane that's flying from Atlanta, and he would say that's Delta Flight 198 on the way to Jackson, Mississippi.
Speaking of that library card, you went back to do a book signing and a reading in that same library in Troy, and tell us how that's
Well, I went back there on July 5th, 1998, for a book signing of Walking with the Wind. And hundreds of blacks and white citizens showed up, had a wonderful reception, and I signed a lot of books. End of the program, they gave me a library card.
And I'm sure the fine folks here at the Durham County Library have done the same because they think of everything. You have been here now for a couple of days. You've been very busy. You've been on a march. You've made a number of talks. What's your experience?
Well, I've been deeply moved, and I just want to thank the librarian and thank the library board, the friends of the library, and the citizens of Durham County. Just been wonderful to my co-author, Andrew Iden, who's in the audience. You know, I said someplace last night, we was in a certain house, and I said I could live here, but I just can't afford it. but the county has been just good. We really been blessed. And we will be coming back. I hope we get invited back for book 2 and book 3. I guess I'm asking for an invitation, huh?
No, it's an open invitation anytime. We're always happy to have you back. I know you have some questions, so we're going to open it up for questions in just one moment, but I think Joanne Abel has another presentation to make at this time. But I want to thank you for this conversation and
Thank
this rare
you.
opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good pleasure.
Thank you.
Very much.
Anyway, for all of you who are at the 63 March on Jogging Street, stand up so we can thank you.
We have a little time for questions. We have 2 microphones, one in each aisle, and I'm assuming they're on. And I know you have questions for Representative Lewis, so please don't be shy. Yes.
I recently came up with a couple of slogans that use the word Dem as in Democrat. Get out Dem votes. Do you find that offensive? A couple of white people have asked me whether black people find it offensive, and I want to know about you. Get out Dem votes.
Get out, D-M, D-E-M.
Do you find that offensive?
I think it's just short for them. I just think everybody should get out and vote. As I said in the past, the vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It's the most powerful, non-violent tool we have in a democratic society, and we should use it.
Can I say a tagline then? Because being right has never been so wrong.
All right. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So, Congressman, I know there was a lot of pressure to change that speech in 1963. How did you go about, what process did you use in making the modifications that you did?
Well, being part of a group that included A. Philip Randolph, who was considered the dean of black leadership. This man was such a prince of a man. I have so much respect and love for him. He dreamed many years ago to organize a march on Washington during the days of President Roosevelt, the days of Truman, President Truman. During some of those early meetings, when the so-called Big Six would meet, it was A. Philip Randolph who said, "Brethren, can I say something good about someone? Just don't say anything." And I took that to heart. And he said, "John, if you can just change this, delete this, we come this far together, let's stay together." There was one line in the speech where Dr. King thought maybe I should change. He said, "John, that doesn't sound like you. Can we change that?" Dr. King was my hero. He was my leader. He was my big brother. And I made the changes. There were some people saying that we shouldn't. One of the reasons for making the changes, we wanted peace, we wanted order, we wanted it to be all inclusive. It was not just the 6 black leaders, but there were 4 major white religious and labor leaders. And there were some people who said that the Archbishop of the Diocese of Washington refused to give the invocation if we didn't make the changes. We don't know whether that was just a threat or whatever. And some people didn't like, I used the word revolution. We're not involved in a serious revolution. They wanted me to change that. Mr. Randolph said, "There's nothing wrong with the use of the word revolution. I use it myself sometime." And there were people who didn't like using the phrase of black masses. But we made the changes. And when the march was all over, President Kennedy invited us back down to the White House. He stood in the door of the Oval Office greeting each one of us. He was beaming like a proud father. And he kept saying, you did a good job, you did a good job. And when he got to Dr. King, he said, you did a good job, and you had a dream.
Well, thank you.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on up and go ahead and yell.
Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm a student at NC State, and as you might know, a lot of the decisions that our legislature have been making have been disenfranchising and discouraging, and making it more difficult for young people to vote and for minorities to vote. And I'm wondering, in this type of elections in the future, what can we do to show people how important these elections are for young people and minorities? What can we
Well,
do?
I think young people and minorities, but all citizens, it doesn't matter whether you're black or white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, whether you're young, middle-aged, older, we got to come together. I think that sometimes we're just a little too quiet, but here in North Carolina, you haven't been that quiet. You have to continue to make some noise. I wish we had a Reverend Barber in other places around this country. To get out there and push and pull. That's the only way we're going to get people in high places to listen. Andrew Iden would tell you that in March, Book 2, we talk about the Voting Rights Act and how President Johnson did not really want to push the voting rights idea. And you said to Dr. King, you make me do it. And we created the climate, created the environment with the Mississippi Summer Project in Selma, and we got the act passed. And I think even today, one of the most meaningful speeches that any American president have made in modern time on the whole question of civil rights or voting rights was a speech that Lyndon Johnson delivered on March 15th, 1965. He started that speech off that night by saying, I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy. At time, history, and fate meet in a single place in man unending search for freedom. So it was more than a century ago at Lexington and at Concord. So it was at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. In that speech, he condemned the violence in Selma, introduced the Voting Rights Act, and before he concluded the speech, he said, and we shall overcome. I was sitting next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the home of a family in Selma as we watched and listened to President Johnson. And tears came down his face. We all cried to hear President Johnson using the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement, and we shall overcome. And we got the Voting Rights Act passed.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Lewis, my name is Greg E. Hill, and first I'd like to say thank you for your time and your presence here in Durham, North Carolina. And second, if you could send a message to all our young minority male leaders in the world, or especially in the United States right now, what would you say?
I would say to all young people, but especially young male minority, and it doesn't matter whether African American, Latinos, Asian American, Native American, but also young white males. We all in the same boat. We all in the same. A. Philip Randolph used to say, just maybe our foremothers and our forefathers all came to this great land in different ships, but we all in the same boat now. And we are. We got to push. We have to tell people, tell young males, but also young women. If Obama can be elected president, why can't some young male from North Carolina Carolina, or from Georgia, from Alabama, or Mississippi, someone from the heart of the inner city, or someone from rural America. We got to see that all of our children, all of our young people, and males especially, receive the best possible education. And not engage in violence. All of this reporting about domestic violence, you got to lead the way. We shouldn't be abusing anybody. Shouldn't be beating anyone.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. My question has to do with events in Ferguson and events here in Durham regarding Jesus Pardo, who somehow managed to shoot himself while his hands were cuffed behind his back in a police car. A lot of stuff has come up recently about militarization of police forces. And I'm wondering how we can work with you and other members of Congress to rein in the violence of the police forces around the country towards people of color and, you know, just people who don't have guns. We're people of peace. We're trying to follow a way of peace. What happens when the people who are meant to be protecting us unleash their power violently?
Well, I think it's important to put cameras on all law enforcement individuals. Really. So people can see. In the cars, yes. Maybe on the helmets. The light will set you free. A camera will set you free. You know, during the height of the civil rights movement, it was not just the people protesting was beaten, but if you were a photographer, a reporter, you could be beaten. In Selma, if you had a pencil and a pad, you had a camera, or during the Freedom Ride in Montgomery. So you just have to tell the truth and let people see the truth.
Question? Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for being here too. And something you just said is you said that we are all in the same boat together, but it seems like that boat is sectioned off into, you know, different parts of the boat where people are still. If we're going to talk about the criminal justice system, it's not just the violence of police officers, it's the way the entire system is structured. And it's the way that people are preyed upon for the color of their skin still. I mean, this is still going on right now. I feel like I want to be a prophet for that. I just read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
Yes.
And I think that book, everybody in the world, me reading this book in the last 2 weeks is, my question is, how do I not know already? How do I not know this? How does everybody not know the stuff that I'm reading right now is so important? And I feel like I was literally in the dark about it until a month ago. I'm 29 years old. How has that happened? And what's being done to change the way that the drug war in America is waged right now to essentially prey upon black and brown people? What's being done in Congress right now to change this?
Well, I think it's important for each one of us to become as informed as possible. I know Michelle Alexander very well. With her Friday a week ago, she appeared at a panel discussion that we had in Washington. Everybody, all of our citizens, our young people especially, should get a copy of the book and read it. And then act. But you're not going to have something coming down from D.C., from members of Congress. Won't be an executive order coming out of the White House. It's the people. We didn't wait on a president to act. during the sit-ins or during the Freedom Ride. We had to create the climate. It's left up to each one of you to get out there and become informed on the issues and act and make some demands. And vote. You're right, sister, whoever said vote. Vote.
Well, can I ask you to amplify that? Because part of the nonviolent, the movement, it was based on the premise that we will not participate with evil. It's non-participation. And so maybe talk more about that. There's getting out into the streets, there's the willingness to be arrested and protest what is wrong, but there's also not participating with those economic, commercial, right, and consumer culture that feeds into all of this and makes all that you said and that Michelle...
Well, during the movement, we had what we call selective buying campaign. Some people call it economic boycott. But it was not just the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, but in other cities and communities in the South. We had a selective buying campaign in downtown Nashville. People said, well, maybe it's these 2 or 3 stores that are discriminating, but we said we withdraw from the entire downtown. We would not spend our dollars. There's another form. Andrew would tell you there's a photograph in my Washington office of me being arrested, been taken to jail, and we call it non-cooperation. I didn't walk eagerly to the wagon. I went limp. So they literally had to carry me. And that took a little weight on me, about 100 and maybe 30 pounds then. And I had all of my hair then, so it was not that heavy. But it was non-cooperation. We have to withdraw from certain things that is not right, not fair, not just, and so we will not cooperate with it. But you have to educate and inform people, so we're not going to be part of this. You say it to elected officials, you say it to people in the business community, the education institution. You have to do it. You cannot wait on someone else to do it.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Lewis, I'm Darrell Roberts. I'm a professor at Tuskegee. I mention that because you referred to Jimmy and his murder earlier. Evil is real, and I think there's some circumstances that require us to confront it whole. Dr. King opposed war, but we're still at war, and I expect that we will continue to be so. What do you say about that? Confronting evil.
Well, in the Bible, I believe it's Matthew's, the 10th chapter and the 34th verse, where the great teacher spoke. He said, I come not to bring peace but a sword. He was not talking about a physical sword. He was talking about a spiritual sword. I agree, war is evil. War is messy. It is bloody. That's what I said against the Iraq War and voted against it. I said it destroyed the hopes and dreams and aspiration of a people. The speech that Dr. King gave on April 4th, 1967, I consider that speech the great speech. He gave it at Riverside Church, where he condemned the war in Vietnam. And he said, in effect, the bombs that were dropping in Vietnam, those bombs would be dropped in America. And in a sense, we're still paying for what we did as a nation and as a people. We're spending millions and millions of dollars right now, probably about $12 million maybe a day, right? That's a lot of money, billions. Those resources can be used here to educate all of our children, to provide housing. peace is not the absence of, some would say, of tension or conflict. It's the presence of justice. And the American people must demand it of their congressional representatives, of the President of the United States, and just so we ain't gonna study war no more. If you believe it, you got to live it.
Ma'am?
Congressman Lewis, please excuse my nervousness with speaking in public. You mentioned that you met your hero, and I'm deeply touched to meet my hero today. And I have a question for you. I have a question for you. I become very frustrated with the obstructionism of Congress, and mostly the obstruction against our president. And I wonder, do you feel that this is based upon racism?
Well, I would like to think, I would like to believe that there are forces in America cannot make the adjustment. Our country is changing. We need to make the adjustment as a people, as a nation. It's hard to see. You hear people saying, we want to take our country back. Back where? You want to go back where? You want it back. So I think racism is still deeply involved in many of the discussion. But we got to free people of that attitude, that belief that a young, smart African-American man cannot be president. A young Latino man or young African-American woman or a young Latino woman or young white woman or Asian American. The day will come, and I think it's going to come very soon, when there will be a woman president. You know. And we will have to make another adjustment. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
The country's not the same country that many of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will grow up in. So we got to get out there and lead the way. America's going to become prouder. It's going to happen.
Last question.
Thank you, Congressman Lewis. My name is Janet. I'm a teacher here. In 1992, I began teaching in Charlotte at a magnet school for choice integration, and I was totally shocked when I ended up with an all-black class. One of the demands from the March on Washington was the desegregation of schools, and yet I'm living in a time when schools are being resegregated. Can you speak to that issue, please?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for teaching.
Yeah.
Thank you. Had been for teachers, I wouldn't be sitting here. Thank you. I had a son who went through public schools in Atlanta. I visited a lot of schools all over America. I don't know how you do it. Sometimes I feel like every school teacher should be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. What you do, in many communities and neighborhoods, in many schools, we almost just dump our children on the school system, on the teachers. So here's my child, you take him, you raise him, you take care of them. We all got to be involved. I think there must be an unbelievable effort to see that all of our children grow up together, study and learn together to create that society where we can lay down the burden of race and the burden of class. We have to do it. is in the best interest of our society.
Thank you.
You got local government, state, and the federal government. But the private sector must play a role to make it happen.
Thank you very much. Thank all of you for coming. I know Joanne Abel has something to say, but John Lewis, thank you. What a great
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wait, if you all would wait 1 second and let Congressman Lewis make his way to the book signing area, if y'all would just stay in here for just a minute. And I wanted to announce that Andrew Iden will be back talking about the Fellowship of Reconciliation comic book. The program is titled The Comic Book That Changed the World. It will be Sunday, October the 26th at 3 p.m. Congressman Lewis, you can go ahead and make your way to the book signing area. And it will be at the Southwest Library. Reverend Barber has one quick announcement. And then I have one other quick announcement.
Somebody said it, forward together. Not one step back. So let's not just allow Congressman Lewis to come here and we clap and we celebrate what he did in the past. Let's say that the greatest form of flattery is imitation. So here's what we want you to do. Leave here today and make a commitment in memory of the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer to contact 50 people and make sure that they are registered to vote, and if they're not, register them. That's number one. And let's do that by the 10th, even though we're hoping for this court decision to stand. And then the second thing, if he marched across the Edmonds-Pettus Bridge with others and he was beaten, can't we march to the polls on October 23rd, the first day of early voting? Think about that. Regardless of who you are, color, party, we are calling on the Forward Together Tomorrow movement, everybody to march to the polls on October the 23rd. Not go, but march to the polls. You'll get information. Let's do that in memory of those that marched, that we might be able to vote.
We have one quick presentation. Tammy Baggett, the Durham County Library Director.
Congressman Lewis, if you would join me up here, please. Frank Stasio almost stole our secret away here. We started with a unity march, and what better way to end this beginning of Durham Reads Together month than to present Congressman John Lewis with the library card from Durham County Library. And I definitely can't leave out the other two people responsible for the book. Andrew Iden, which I think has stepped away now for the book signing, also gets a library card, as well as the illustrator, Nate Powell. So we here in Durham County know that we have a great library system, and now we have a celebrity library card holder as well. Andrew. Thank you all.